So it's funny that you actually mentioned that, because that's kind of the reason why Lauren and I started the podcast, is because of both her and more my dissatisfaction with sort of a lot of the analysis that you see in game design is very, I don't want to say superficial, but it's like in the practical, like when it comes to sort of practical skills, it's extremely deep and extremely like rigorous. But when it comes to sort of like thinking about like high level philosophical and or like literary / like narratological questions, it tends to be pretty shallow. And so one of the reasons why we started the podcast is because we actually wanted to sort of make that other half, the sort of the theoretical / philosophical half, as equally in depth as the sort of like the more practical skills that particularly like the more, famous game design like courses and whatnot and degree things. Curricula, that's the word I was looking for. Yeah, no, I have actually been following the Biomutant stuff. It's not a game, and I don't know, like I haven't really been engaged with it all that much. One, because it's not a game I've played, but also because, I don't know, like reviews are a weird creature. Because one, the people who write reviews tend to get like a very kind of both specialized, but also sort of like restricted access to versions of the game when they review it. Sometimes they're given just like a key to the full game. They can review it that way. But I don't know, the circumstances under which reviews get produced are highly suspect just in and of themselves. So honestly, I tend to take reviews with a grain of salt. I mostly rely on actual like recommendations from people I know, and more specifically from people who are into games similar to the ones that I enjoy. Because one of the things that always sort of gets left out of, game reviews is that, certain people just don't like certain kinds of games. And certain people really love other kinds of games. And sort of like, you can have like so for example, you could have a fairly like mediocre like Paradox game or like a mediocre like city builder game, and I would probably love it. Because I like those sorts of games. I like sort of management things. It's one of the reasons why I play Healer, is because I like the kind of gameplay where it's about sort of keeping everything together and sort of managing things and making sure that everything works the way it's supposed to. But if you're not that kind of person, and Lauren actually doesn't particularly like playing those kinds of games. She does play Healer though, so don't get me wrong. But like that's not a defect in her, and it's not like, a great privilege in me. It's one of those things where it's like reviews need to actually think about the kind of player that a game is for, and if they themselves are not that kind of player, then just admit that. And so that's why I realize that sort of like does and doesn't answer your question, but that's the thing I think sort of gets left out of these sorts of discussions. It's like, who is this for? And is this a game that is well designed for them? But the problem is that first question rarely gets asked, and that's sort of my frustration. All right, I kept watch twice for the Vanu Vanu. I don't want to have to kill all these. They kind of look like tanuki, like owl / tanuki. I don't want to kill them, so I'm just going to run past them. Yeah. I'm glad. Yeah, I don't know. It's just like reviews are frustrating. I find reviews to be really frustrating for that very reason. Yeah, like Greedfall. So also, like, if you think about it for a second, reviews don't really have the greatest track record of actually like discovering what will be really popular and or like well-loved games. And also, like, for example, I think back to sort of like, the kerfuffle over Cyberpunk 2077, where the people who were reviewing the game were playing a version of the game that was far more stable than what the vast majority of people ended up having to deal with, particularly on the PS4. And so, as a result, the game was reviewed much better as a result, because they were in many ways sort of hiding the failures, or sort of the problems that the game clearly had. So, I don't know, like, it's the basic access journalism problem, and Lauren is right, Greedfall is an amazing game. And that's the thing, it's like, if game reviews can't find those really amazing games, precisely because so much like games journalism is a function of access that you have either to, like, because all of these companies now have these like people whose job it specifically is to essentially like reach out to streamers, reach out to reviewers, reach out to people who do like YouTube playthroughs, and essentially like push the game on them. Now, they don't necessarily push a line about the game, because that would be unethical, and they're by and large ethical, with some exceptions. But the thing is that there have been a number of famous incidences, I'm not going to point out to any one of them in particular, where someone has had that kind of privileged access to, a company's games, and then they review one of their games poorly, and all of a sudden find they no longer have that access. And so there are these perverse incentives to be, if not like to like heap praise, then there are definitely incentives not to be negative, even if you genuinely don't like what you're playing. Now, I'm actually personally, I personally believe that like feedback should be largely constructive. I mean, that just goes back to sort of the way I am as a teacher. Precisely because it's like, instead of saying like, oh, this aspect of this game sucks, a better way to like make that point, but to do it in a constructive way, is to say like, this is what you could have done with this. And that's sort of the point that I was trying to make, last week about the Moonbrita quest line, is that there was an example of a quest earlier in the main scenario quest line that actually did the same thing really well. And so it's better to highlight those sorts of things, because if you highlight what the done well is, the done bad will be obvious by comparison. And I don't want to rant. I should play the game, but I also want to rant. Finished with your patrol? Anything to report? Although I guess me sitting here playing Final Fantasy XIV is just an opportunity to rant on the internet. We just don't give a good picture of the games anymore. Yeah, no, it's true. So for those of you who are only like listening to me or watching me, you're missing out on the really great chat. So that's one of the advantages of being here live, is that you can be engaged in the really excellent chat discussions. Yeah, so for those of you out there who like take reviews seriously, you should always take reviews with a grain of salt. So, back in my day, so I'm a 42-year-old man. Back in the day, the primary way people found out about a game was you acquired a demo of said game, you played the demo, and if you liked the demo, you then bought and played the rest of the game. That was the thing people did. And nowadays you can do a similar thing where, you can watch playthroughs on YouTube and so forth. And like, I highly recommend this precisely because, I don't know, like, so much of games journalism is this sort of like constant hype train. And you even see this like amongst, famous YouTubers as well. It's like, oh, now we're playing the next big thing. And you see it in streamers. Sorry, the streamer says. You see it among streamers as well. It's like, now we're playing the next big thing. And now we're playing the next big thing. And now we're playing the next big thing. And they have to do that because they have to play the next big thing because they have to keep their stream numbers up. They have to keep their view numbers up on YouTube. So I'm not blaming them for that. Like, they're doing the smart thing for themselves as like people who have to make money. As someone who doesn't have to make money doing this, I can play whatever the F I want. Yeah, I play Dragon Age Inquisition. See, here's a good example of precisely why you should use the recommendations of people that you have some sort of like connection with. It doesn't necessarily need to be a person that you're like friends with, but they will be able to explain. So here's the thing. Oftentimes, and I notice this in my students all the time, that they can read something by themselves and get something out of it, but not nearly as much as they get out of it through like discussion with myself, their classmates. The whole like experience of reading something together actually magnifies how much they get out of the experience of reading a particular text. And the exact same thing is true of video games, where when you play it sort of alongside someone, or you play it through their, I guess, perception of it, if you will, you start to see the things that they see. You can even take a game that initially you didn't like all that much, and it becomes a game that you really adore, precisely because your appreciation for the game is then also part of your social connection to other people, and like all of those things combine into sort of like a kind of grand justification for playing it. A review doesn't do that. A review doesn't give you that sense of connection to a work of art in the same way that like a personal recommendation does. Rant over. Let's go back to Lynette. Oh yeah, so yeah, definitely. So I think part of the reason for that is like, you know, YouTubers and less streamers, more YouTubers. YouTubers tend to go far more in depth with a game, and often because on YouTube, so here's the thing that you have to understand. It's like, yeah, when you read an IGN review, that review has gone through so many editorial layers that all of the joy has been sucked right out of it. Whereas a YouTuber can just be like, I love this game, and I'm going to explain to you why I love this game, and I'm so awkward, but you will love it too. And then you do. And the reason why is because there are both problems with that lack of the lack of those editorial layers, and that oftentimes the arguments are extremely confused. However, the sort of the sense of like, has not been sort of like sucked out of it. So yeah, definitely, I would agree.